morning.
Good morning.
How y'all doing?
Good.
It's good to see all y'all. Brother Ben has several times now impressed upon me his deep concern that younger men like myself have been taking too long to get our sermons together. I try to put a lot of preparation into the lessons I share with you guys. That takes time. But I'm happy to help give Brother Ben a much-needed rest. Last Sunday, Brother Nick Odom spoke up here. This Sunday, I'm with you. So I'm glad to be part of those who can help give him a break. He needs rest. Rest is important. We all need rest. Rest is a good thing. Even God made time to rest. As I began preparing this lesson, I found myself wondering, what if instead of a sermon, I told you a story? Will they check out and go to sleep? I ask myself. Or will they be able to appreciate a good story? We encounter stories all the time. Typically, we might imagine going to a book to get a story, novels. It was a common place to find stories. In this morning's class, the adult class was watching a movie. That's another place where we get stories, is from movies. But there are other ways that we get either stories or pieces of stories. We encounter those on a daily basis throughout the week. I was wondering real quick if you all can reflect with me and think, what are some ways throughout the week that you may typically encounter stories from day to day? Give me some ideas real quick. What are some ways that you can think of on the day-to-day you might encounter a story? Television? Parents teaching? Okay. Word of mouth, right? Text messages. Maybe even a friend face-to-face. They might tell you some stories, right? You might get that orally. Any other? What was that? A movie. Movies are full of stories. A painting, artwork, very much so. Pictures hold stories, are worth 1,000 words, and can communicate stories a lot quicker than reading a book sometimes. Music, very good. Music is so often built around stories. If you play video games, oftentimes that is a narrative, an interactive story that you're participating in, right? So all of these ways are news media. That's another one I want to point out. The news media, all it is just storytelling based on events, right? So there are a lot of ways throughout the week that whether we recognize it or not, we're encountering stories. If you added up all the bits and pieces of story that we get in a single week, I imagine it'd be quite a bit if you could actually track it and log how much story we're getting. So I wondered, if I took just a few moments this morning and told you guys a story, would that be okay? The story I was considering telling this morning is called The House of God. The House of God. It's not a new story by any stretch. It's a very old story. What will they think if I get up here and I say that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth? Or if I tell how on the first pages of this story, there's nothing there. There's nothing at the beginning of the story, only darkness. Darkness covering the face of the deep. But there's also God. God is there. He's hovering over like a bird, hovering over the waters, dreaming of a place where he may one day land and rest his wings, dreaming of a home where he can one day be at rest. And then what if I tell them the part about how he simply speaks and all that he's been hoping for is so? how his words become flesh and flashes of light. They become fish in flowing waters and fresh air for the fowl up there. His voice becomes valleys, veins, volcanoes, and vanilla bean. His imagination is manifested as majestic mountains. His wisdom awakens an entire world to life. And every last grain of it is God-breathed and good. If I tried to tell it, would you listen to a story this morning? Yeah, what would you say if it were true that all his created things were so thoughtfully and wonderfully made that they fitly framed together like the cinder blocks and the cedar planks of a carefully crafted house? What if the entire created world, from vine-grown grapes to the far reaches of space, from the crowds to the clouds over full-flowered mounds, from the tiniest atom to angels unfathomed, from trees and seas to the birds and the bees, the seen, the unseen, everything in between? What if his design is so skillful that it all works together as one masterful feat of creative genius? Yes, the seen and unseen, everything in between. I said the seen and unseen, everything in between, for both are created by God as creations. And we've got to stop splitting to make deviations. We've got to stop splitting to make deviations where the one we call good, while what's seen is marked bad. For God made them both, and he made both to last. Both the seen and unseen. Everything in between. Yes, he made them both. He made them to last. For example, when God made our souls, of what did he make them? Not wind, light, or cloud fluff. He made them of clay. Physical, material, unending life. This soul could be touched. It could breathe. It had eyes. This soul could be touched. It could breathe. It had eyes. In Genesis 2, in verse 7, it says, "The Lord God took dust from the ground and made man. And a spirit of life into it God breathed, and that is how the first soul was conceived." Genesis 2 and verse 7, it said, "The Lord God took dust from the ground and made man. And a spirit of life into it God breathed, and that is how the first soul was conceived." See, the spiritual is not just the things we can't see. The spiritual world involves everything, every last thing he called good and God breathed. From the trees and the seas to the birds and the bees, both the seen and unseen, everything in between. Yes, what's spiritual can include everything. And so in this story, the house of God, all his created things are so thoughtfully and wonderfully made that they fitly frame together like a house built precisely to plan. As it stated so clearly in Hebrews chapter 3, every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. Of course, God's house is not like our houses. For one, our houses are made with human hands, but God's house is made by his own hand, so to speak. Also, his house is the entire created universe, and the materials from which it is constructed, they are alive. Living stones built into a spiritual dwelling place for God, 2 Peter 2:4. The parts of his house, they move, they breathe. And what holds them all together as a house is not screws or nails or cement. No, what holds this house together is cooperation. The solidarity of billions of living organisms. A type of generosity, that natural give and take without which life itself would cease to exist. In other words, God's creation house is held together by a type of love. In this story, the house of God is not just a place of rest, it is a community. All creation is like a living family, God breathed and good. After hovering for so long, God now has a beautiful place to call home. H-O-M-E, home. He no longer has to hover above alone in the endlessness of eternity. He can finally land and rest somewhere. Now, the next chapter of the story, it focuses in on one unique piece of God's vast universe, which plays a particularly unique role. The purpose of this special thing is to guide, guard, and conduct the whole symphony of life according to God's good design. To guide, guard, and conduct the entire symphony of life according to God's good design. King David, he sang about this unique piece of God's creation in the 8th Psalm. The psalm begins like this. He says, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You've put your glory on display in the heavens. Yes, when I consider those skies, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, I can't help but wonder, what is humanity, the people made from dirt, that you are mindful of them, that you care for them? Yet you have placed them only a little lower than the heavenly beings. Crowned them with glory and honor. You've given them authority over the works of your hand. You have put all things under their feet. What is this unique piece of God's creation given such a special purpose? It's people, the ones made from dirt. And God places all things under their feet. This phrase, all things, is a pivotal, important phrase in this story. I want you to go ahead and make a mental note, pin that phrase there, all things. If you have paper out and you're writing stuff with a pen, go ahead and write that down. All things. What is the all things? Well, David goes on to explain the sheep and oxen, all of them. Also the animals in the wilds, the birds in the air, the fish in the sea, and anything else which passes through the paths of the ocean. Genesis 1 adds, over all the earth, every creature that crawls upon the ground, every seed-bearing plant and fruit tree you have for food. Elsewhere we read, O Lord, you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. From vine-grown grapes to the far reaches of space, from the trees and the seas to the birds and the bees, all things he put under their feet. What we find out in this story is that the Creator crowns human beings with the highest responsibility of running his entire house, of safeguarding God's most cherished place of rest. The whole reason they exist is to encourage the continual cooperation of all nature's most crucial connections, to care, keep, and cultivate God's own garden paradise, to escort his spirit of solidarity through every stream and species. They exist for the singular purpose of being a force for good in the world. Yes, what do you think of the idea that we, despite our present frailties and limitations, actually exist for a particularly unique purpose, God-breathed and good? Genesis says, then God saw everything that he had made, everything he had built. And indeed, it was very good, very good. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts, and on the seventh day God rested from all his work he'd done. God blessed that day and sanctified it, because on it he rested from his work. But what if, in the very next chapter of the story, the people spoil that divine responsibility? What if they stray from the path and lose their way? What if they steer the whole creation away from life-giving cooperation and point it towards competition instead? Away from harmony towards a hateful hierarchy? Oh, what would happen next if instead of caring and keeping, the people begin damaging and destroying God's holy home, vandalizing his miraculous masterpiece, scavenging the dismembered parts of his house as raw material for their own? What if they become like guests who've forgotten whose house this is? In what follows, God's delightful deltas are dismantled by them. The sweet dew of his dawn is condemned by them, and his dazzling sand dunes they demolition. His opulent oceans are overhauled. His luxuriant jungles they drill under, and they frack his fields for oil. They have the audacity to inventory his islands and the temerity to trademark his tropics. The life that once saturated cedar forests is bulldozed to make room for sterile suburbs. And scenic landscapes, once satisfying to the eye, are paved over so that highways may pass by. Because they prefer dollar signs over eyes that see, and have burnt holes where their pockets should be. This is why they want to monetize migration patterns and to franchise his carnation flowers. It's why they set aside the cycle of his seasons for a speedier service. It's why they forego the fresh fruit of his fields for faster food. It's why they take his triumphant, towering trees and they topple them for toilet paper. And it's why they would replace the precious principle of compassionate peoplehood with these parasitic, polarizing political parties. Did you hear me? I said they tear down the human family with one hand as they build up their freedom fences with the other. They have downgraded their own sanity with every upgrade of their smartphones. Oh, what would happen if the very people he promoted and trusted to be caretakers of his house, stewards of all that's good and right in the world, what if they begin tearing it all apart? Tearing themselves apart. This is the chapter of the story where the people pollute God's holy house to the point that he can no longer rest there in peace. This is the chapter of the story where he can no longer rest. He had fit it all together in a harmonious circle of unending life. They have redesigned the world such that what it produces now is envy, greed, violence, and death. God's house is no longer a home. As the 20th century American psalmist Luther Vandross sang, a chair is still a chair, even when there's no one sitting there. But a chair is not a house And a house is not a home when those inside are far apart, when those inside have broken hearts. God's house is no longer his home. He saw it and it grieved him. Genesis 6:11 through 14. The Lord was sorry he'd even made people on the earth. His heart was grieved. The earth was corrupt and full of violence, for every one of them had corrupted their way. What will God do now? Where will he go? Where can he rest? Will you let me tell you God's side of the story this morning? After all of this tragedy, would you believe it if I told you that God doesn't just throw it all away, throw in the towel, turn his back, and walk away from this giant, disappointing mess? Would you believe it if the one who approached darkness and spoke light, the one who made everything from nothing, the one who says, you meant it for evil, but I'm going to use it for good. Would you believe if this kind of God looks at this utterly devastating, heart-wrenching catastrophe of cosmic proportions and still wants to somehow turn it into something good? Would you believe it if I told you he has a plan? Not to move on from this big mess, not to escape it, but to try and fix it. Could he really want to come back and live in a world that's been wrecked and ruined? A house in shambles. Yes, what if God drafts up some kind of blueprint, some kind of a plan to do the unthinkable? The story goes that if this impossible scheme is going to work, he's going to need at least one person on the inside who he can trust. Somebody who understands, somebody who gets it. Yes, God will need someone in the world to be a little place where he can begin to once again land and rest his wings. God will need someone in the world, like an olive branch dove that finds the ark, floating amidst the flood of chaos and trouble. The gospel writings tell us that as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water, and at that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and landing upon him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, this is the one whom I love. I am well pleased with him." Pleased to rest in him, to dwell in him. It's written that in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. And again, God was in Christ, reconciling the world unto himself. If this God can find even one small place of peace in the world where he might perch, one Prince of Peace where he is welcome, then maybe, just maybe, that person can find and recruit others who will join him in welcoming God back home. And this is precisely how the story goes. Yeshua of Nazareth recruits a ragtag gang of disciples, and together they become the first stage of God's worldwide renovation. His plan, the plan of salvation, is in fact a plan of renovation. The plan of salvation is in fact a plan of renovation. You see, somewhere I read, the skies are his throne and the earth is his footstool. Somewhere I read, let the whole earth be filled with his glory. Somewhere I read that he stores the glorious treasure of himself in earthen vessels Somewhere I read, his people are living stones being fit together into a holy house for the Spirit of the living God, built upon a foundation of apostles and prophets, of which the chief cornerstone is Christ himself. Yes, the plan of salvation, it is a plan of renovation. And this Jesus, Yeshua of Nazareth, the son of a builder, faithfully carries God's plan to the people. And those who join him, they find that they have taken up that mantle which was abandoned by Adam and Eve way back in the garden. That sacred responsibility to steward the presence of God, the Spirit of love in this world, to be caretakers of God's house, to encourage the continual cooperation of all nature's most crucial connections. The plan of salvation is the plan of renovation. As I reflected on this lesson, I also wondered, even if I were to stand up here and tell this story, would you all believe how it ends? If I told you about the final chapter, would you even believe that the good, God-breathed creation house which he built at the beginning of the story, God gets that back? Somehow, some way, God does it. In the end, he does make a home of the world which he built by his own hand. He makes a family of the people who he created in his own image. Revelation 21 says that when God's plan is finally achieved, there is a new heaven and a new earth, because the first heaven and the first earth will have passed away. God's holy city will come down out of heaven from God, and his voice will thunder forth from his throne. Now God's dwelling place is with humanity. God's home is with humanity, for he will come live with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. And they will be a great crowd of people that no one can count, from every ethnicity, tribe, people, and language, wearing bright robes with palm branches in their hands. And together they cry out, "Salvation! Salvation belongs to our God and to the Lamb." And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. The old order of things has passed away. And he who is seated on the throne, he says, "Look, open your eyes. I am making all things new. I am making all things new." This is how the story ends. All things renewed, restored, resurrected, all things. His plan of salvation is a plan of renovation. The good news of the kingdom, it is the good news of God's homecoming to a house built of all things, both the seen and unseen, everything in between. Yes, every house has a builder, and the one rebuilding all things is God. This may not be the story you're used to hearing. Some of you might even feel a little skeptical. Is that really how that story goes? It's true that the things we can see, touch today will not last forever. They're fading away. But consider for a moment that maybe that's not because God's creations can't last. Rather, what's made by our hands must eventually pass. The old order of things must pass away. 2 Corinthians 4, Paul writes, our sufferings today, momentary and light. So focus not on that which is seen, because what you can see is temporary. No, fix now your gaze on eternity, on what is eternal, on what is unseen. 2 Corinthians 4, Paul writes, our sufferings today, momentary and light. So focus not on that which is seen, because what you can see is temporary. Fix now your gaze on eternity, on what is eternal, on what is unseen. That's 2 Corinthians 4 and 18. So why will the things we can see pass away? Is it because they are physical? No. It's because they're today. See, Paul's own explanation of temporary things is not that they're physical, they're momentary. What happens today, we can see right before us. The world of tomorrow is hidden. It takes trust and hope, eyes of faith. We will need to focus our lives on what can't yet be seen. What happens today, we can see right before us. The world of tomorrow is hidden. It takes trust and hope, eyes of faith. We will need to focus our lives on what can't yet be seen. So why will the things we can see pass away? Is it because they're physical? No, it's because they're today. Today's world is broken by human endeavors. Tomorrow's world listens to God, lasts forever. Yes, the seen and unseen, everything in between. Every last grain will be good and God breathed. When Paul here writes to his audience to focus on the unseen, he is saying to focus on future things. He is not saying to ignore God's created things. I want to say that one more time. When Paul says focus on the unseen, he is telling folks to focus on future things. He is not telling them to dismiss God's created things. This is why in Romans 8, the same Paul could also write that the whole creation groans and labors, eagerly awaiting its deliverance from the bondage of corruption. The whole creation is waiting to be delivered from its bondage to corruption, and that we ourselves also groan, eagerly waiting for the redemption of our body. He's specific there, the redemption of our body. He does not say the redemption of your soul, the redemption of your spirit. Paul is being specific, the redemption of our body. For this, the redemption of our body, is the future hope in which we're saved. How can Paul say things like that if the physical world is meaningless to him? If it's not important and has no future, why is he talking like this? Elsewhere, he even doubles down, saying that if the dead are not raised to live again, then our entire faith is absolutely pointless. Paul understood what God's goal is. He understood God's mission statement. Look, I am making all things new. That is the tagline of the entire story. That is how it ends. When Peter talks about the story's ending, he calls it the coming restoration of all things. The coming restoration of all things. Yeshua the Messiah called it the renewal of all things. The renewal of all things, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne. Ephesians 1:10, Paul writes again, God's plan for the fullness of time is to unite all things through his Son, things in heaven and things on earth. God's plan for the fullness of time, that means his plan for the end of the story, is to unite all the things in heaven and on earth, the seen and unseen, everything in between. With man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. There's a certain author who once communicated all of this quite well. I want to read you what he said. This author said that the Bible's aim is not the freeing of the spirit from the world. The Bible's aim is not the freeing of the spirit from the world. No, the Bible is the handbook of their interaction. It says that the spiritual and the physical cannot be divided, that their mutuality, their unity is inescapable, that God and the world are not reconciled in division but in harmony. Heaven and earth are not reconciled by their permanent division. They are reconciled by their everlasting harmony. That quote sums up the house of God. It's the age-old tale of a God who creates a house of rest for himself. But tragedy strikes when his own people tear apart the perfect world he has put together. Things get so bad that God can no longer remain at peace in his own house. But that's not the end of the story. God does not give up. He has a plan. He finds one faithful son, and together they attempt to do the impossible, to redeem the entire house of creation. In the end, God does it. He snatches victory from the jaws of defeat. He speaks light into the darkness once more. He resurrects life from the grave. God wins himself a family of people. God wins back his eternal home. This is the story I wanted you all to hear this morning. From time to time, Brother Ben will mention that he's not a big fan of theological twaddle. Y'all have heard him say that phrase, theological twaddle. This is discussing various topics at length just for the sake of discussing them. I'm not much of a fan of that either, mostly because I prefer practically useful information. That's why I'll conclude this morning by quickly connecting a few dots to show how useful this story can be to you beyond this morning and outside these four walls. Is that all right? The house of God is a rich story with lots of transforming potential because there are actually things for us to do in response to the story. That's one unique thing about this story. Though the ending has been written, the end has not yet happened. And so that means that we are active participants inside of God's story. There's a lot of benefit that can come when you remember and respond to his story. I'll highlight just one of those benefits now. Here it is. This story has the potential to strengthen your connection with God. To strengthen your connection with God. How does that work? Well, one of the things this story does is it reminds us that God built this entire house that we call life. And that he is the one sharing his life and his breath and everything else with us. In other words, our existence is made possible by God's hospitality. Here's the connecting dot. What this means is that each morning when he wakes you up, that is your invitation back into his house for another day. So tomorrow, if the Lord allows us to see it, let's find one or two ways to express a little gratitude towards God for this great gesture of hospitality he's shown. And doing this will work to strengthen your connection with God. But Brian, what does it look like to express gratitude towards God? I'm glad you asked. Well, how do we typically express gratitude to someone who's invited us over to their house for a home-cooked meal? What do? Do we just, when they open the door, do you just walk right by them and then put your feet up and then act like you run the house? Is that what you do when you've been invited over? I hope not. What do? When they open the door to us, we probably take a moment to say hello. That reasonable? Maybe even to thank them for having us over, right? So tomorrow when you wake up and you're ready to get out of bed, try starting your day by greeting God. Pause, take a moment, just acknowledge him. My Father, good morning. Thank you for inviting me back into your house again today. Thank you. Say hello to God. Say good morning. Thank you. You can say more if you like to, but at least say hello. Right? Secondly, no dinner host likes to see their guests fighting and bickering or not getting along. And generally, if we respect the person hosting us, then we'll do our best to honor the other guests who have also been invited over to the house. Another way this morning that this story can help strengthen your connection to God is by reminding you to honor God's other house guests, meaning the people that you see all around you from one day to the next. Those are God's house guests. If you love God, you should not be making others feel unworthy or unwelcome at the banquet of life. No matter what language they speak, what side of the tracks they're from, or what side of a border they may have come from. This world is God's world, God's house, God's table. Everyone breathing has been invited as God's guests. Everyone breathing has been invited here as God's guests. So tomorrow, you could also strengthen your connection with God by being more generous towards others, your fellow guests in God's house, fellow guests at life's banquet. So be generous. Pass the rolls. Right? Don't try to hog all the mac and cheese down at your end of the table. Be generous with everything, every dish that God has passed your way, no matter what it might be, because he's not just sharing it with you. It's for everybody at the table. The point of life is not for you to get more food than everyone else. It's not. It is for everyone to enjoy his meal together. The point of this whole thing is for everybody to enjoy his meal together. Let us not applaud the wealth of the few over the well-being of the many, nor the progress of one part at the expense of the whole. Rather, become a force for good in the world, a force for God in this world. Let us not behave like guests who have forgotten whose house this is. It's God's house. It's God's story. As soon as you wake up tomorrow morning, there are going to be bits and pieces of other stories being fed to you. We spent a little bit of time at the beginning of this talking about different ways that we engage stories throughout the week. As soon as you wake up, those other stories are going to be there. These other stories, they're going to tell you things like, obey your thirst. You do you. Have it your way. Speak your truth. Be all you can be. Just do it. You only live once. What's in your wallet? Live your best life. These other stories, they will not remind you that this is God's house. Instead, they will insist that you believe that it's your house. That this is your story. This is your life, your property. Bits and pieces of such distraction stories have been sprinkled already all over you and me for years. But this morning, I'm inviting you to come take permanent shelter in the house of God, in the shadow of his wings. I'm inviting you this morning that when you wake up tomorrow, before you turn on a TV, before you turn up the music, before you pick up a smartphone or a tablet, yes, before you give those other stories even the opportunity to set your course for the day, to suggest what role you should play, please, please, please acknowledge God first. Greet him. Say good morning. Thank him. And never forget whose house this really is. Never forget at whose table you're eating every second of the day. Never forget that before you were anything else, you were made to be God-breathed and good. Please stand as we sing.